Hello Year 12, I hope you are all very, very well. I'm not sure how clear this is going to be because it's 8 o'clock, 10 past 8 on Wednesday night. It's been a very busy day and I completely forgot that I hadn't recorded, so I'm doing this now to try and get it uploaded in time for your lesson tomorrow, and it's gone quite dark, so I'm not sure how well this light's going to pick up. When I look at it down here, it makes me look like an angel. I'm joking. Right, so before half term, I sent you the PowerPoint on the first kind of 4 on this PowerPoint and asked you to just summarise the milestones according to those individuals. Now there are a couple of you that have sent them to me, and I thank you for that. And I think I have given feedback to everybody, but I might be wrong. So just give me a nudge, please, if you've emailed it to me and I haven't responded. Just, send me a shouty email to say, Miss, you've not responded. I promise I will be better when we get back to work. So obviously things are a little bit different now than they were when I recorded the kind of last video, which was before half term. So we do know, obviously, we are now back in effect. So I was in on Monday, I'm in again this Monday coming, and then I'm in on Friday, and then we are all back as a staff on the 15th, and then ready for you guys on the 16th. So I've seen the timetables. You will still have 2 lessons a week with me. So we will obviously be working on this unit, and what I will try to do during that period is just catch up with anything that people haven't done or anything that people are struggling with, and just to try and get as far ahead as we can, or as much of this unit completed as we possibly can before we finish for the summer. That will be my plan. So today I wanted to go through these 4. So Jenner, Chadwick, Snow and Nightingale. So I'm going to go through these 4. I'm going to set you this to do during Thursday's lesson, Friday's lesson, and I want this handed in then. So both parts. So if you haven't already handed me in this part, then before next Thursday's lesson, I want this part and this part. If you have already handed me in the green part, then I want the yellow part in. I hope that makes sense. And then next Thursday, the video will be on these following 5. Now, what I haven't decided is whether I'm going to leave this bit, the 20th century, because that's quite big. There's lots of health kind of epidemics and pandemics within the 20th century, so I might leave that until the following week, and then I will set you that to complete over the week before we come back to school. So your first lesson with me will be on the Thursday of the first week back. Now, during today's lesson, so Thursday's lesson, I will be online. I am leaving at 20 past 12 and I'll be back by about 1:45. So Dylan has his preschool injections tomorrow, which I'm dreading. But I am not taking him in, my husband is, but I will drive him down there. So I have already cleared it that I'm okay to kind of just leave you for 20 minutes. So I will be back and I will have my phone if you desperately need me, but just in case I don't reply as quickly as I normally would, that's where I am. So let's just go through these then. So Y12 Jenner, if any of you watch The Walking Dead or have watched The Walking Dead, he's mentioned in the first series of The Walking Dead. I can't remember what episode it is, but there is a gentleman there. One of the patients is called, I think it's TS19. He's called Y12 Jenner, and it's based on Y12 Jenner. Okay, so he's responsible for the development of the smallpox vaccine, and he is very often credited with being kind of the pioneer of immunisation. This was one of the first sort of immunisations that were developed. So what he basically did was, there was a lady called Sarah, I can't remember her last name, lady called Sarah, who had been infected with cowpox. He then, and this is disgusting, it makes me feel a little bit sick, he scraped the pus from those cowpox blisters on her hands and injected it into an 8-year-old boy who developed a fever and a little bit of uneasiness, but then got no infection from it. And that predominantly is the basis of what vaccines are now. You may get a fever with them, you may get a little bit of uneasiness, you may get a little bit of swelling, a little bit of redness, but it doesn't develop into a vaccine, it doesn't develop into an infection, sorry. And then from that, obviously, he began to inject people all around with this vaccine. Okay, and then in 1979, the World Health Organization declared smallpox an eradicated disease, so it no longer exists. Now, you can see the difference in time. So he died in 1823, and it wasn't until almost a decade and a little bit afterwards, decade and a half almost afterwards, that it was actually declared an eradicated disease. And actually, this is the only disease. Smallpox is, I think it is the only, if not one of the only. There might be two, but from memory, I think it is the only disease that has ever been completely eradicated from history, and that does not exist in general circulation anymore. There are some pus samples that remain in laboratories within the CDC, which is the Centre for Disease Control in America, and there are some in laboratories in Russia. But other than that, nobody has contracted smallpox until since 1979, if not before. Then we go on to Edwin Chadwick, and Jenner's, when I read about this, Jenner's kind of development and the vaccine actually seems to me like it should be a little bit further ahead than Edwin Chadwick, but it's not. So Jenner's was first, but Edwin Chadwick was responsible for reforming the poor laws in England. So there was a very serious outbreak of typhus in 1838, and Edwin Chadwick convinced the Poor Law Board that there needed to be an inquiry, and that inquiry was the first sort of point where doctors actually said, okay, the conditions that people live in and the living conditions of the population may actually contribute to whether they get ill or not. So looking at whether that actually people who live in poorer conditions are more likely to get ill than people who live in better conditions. And that was the first time really that doctors had ever really looked at that link and kind of made that connection. I'm doing this a lot with my hair, I'm irritating myself, but yeah, we won't go there. So following on from this kind of view and the look and the research and the inquiry into the housing conditions, he then published a report which was called A Report into the Sanitary Condition of the Labouring Population of Great Britain, and it was predominantly around people who were poor or people who were working and were out there working, but their living conditions weren't brilliant because their pay wasn't brilliant. And then he looked at the most efficient ways to construct drains, because obviously the sewerage and the drainage system at this point wasn't brilliant, and that was leading to quite a lot of sort of ill health outbreaks because the water wasn't clean, things weren't draining off properly. So he looked at the most efficient ways to construct a drain to be able to give people clean water, to be able to get rid of sewerage properly. And he, after this, became convinced that every house should therefore have a permanent water supply. So rather than water pumps on streets or water that they had to go and fetch from various different places, that every house needed to have a permanent water supply. And following on from that report, that led to the introduction of the Public Health Act in 1848. Now you will notice that I haven't discussed the Public Health Act in 1848, and that's because I want you to go away and do some research. So when you are talking about Edwin Chadwick in your work, I do want you to talk about what the Public Health Act is. Not in any great detail, but you need to go away and you need to research what that Health Act actually is and what rights that gave individuals. So whilst he was around, and he links in very nicely with John Snow. So initially John Snow was one of the first people to kind of study and calculate doses for the use of ether and chloroform as surgical anaesthetics, and there was a lot of work that he did around breathing apparatus and using the correct breathing equipment and how much anaesthetic for people to use, using anaesthetics in childbirth, things like that. So he was one of the first people to kind of develop that and carry out that study. But probably the thing that he's most recognised for, and I touched on this a little bit in the last PowerPoint when I talked about this, was cholera. So it was caused and spread by dirty and contaminated water, but what happened was people at the time didn't think that it was being spread by dirty water. Because they didn't really understand how germs were spread and how bacteria was spread, they didn't really realise that it was being spread, for example, by people drinking the water and then coughing. So they might cough into their hands, and then they'd go and touch the pump on the water source, and then the next person would come along, pump the water, and that was how it was spread, and that they didn't realise it was also predominantly in the water. And then that was when John Snow came along, and he discovered that actually this was it was being spread through the water. So he basically mapped out where the outbreak was. He mapped out, he kind of got a map, and he mapped geographically where all the outbreaks of cholera were. And from that map, he was able to identify that it was all centred around a street called Broad Street, and on that street was a public water pump. And he then identified that the people who were getting poorly, or the people that were dying, were people who had used that water pump. And he was quite heavily criticised for it. People didn't believe him, but actually I think it was caused by, I mean, it says on here that it was raw sewage that was being dumped into the towns, and then the same water was being transmitted, but it was also from a dirty nappy that had been dumped and had then got into the water that also caused it. So this is considered to be the founding, that should say event. Thank you, Tanzila. That should say event, not even, of the science of epidemiology. So this is where kind of epidemiology really started, because he was the first person to go, this is where it's happening, this is the geographical map of where things are happening, and this is why. So he was considered to be kind of the main the first epidemiologist. And then obviously you've got Florence Nightingale. Now, she's not an epidemiologist, but she is a major development in health, and I haven't talked about her a huge amount here because her contribution actually is massive, and I only get 15 minutes and I'm already running out of time, so I'm conscious that I need to talk a little bit quicker. But she obviously worked in the Crimean War. When she first arrived, she noticed that the people who were wounded were being cared for by staff who were overworked. They had very little medicine. There was no real hygiene there. Infections were common, and the vast majority of people were dying from these infections. And she petitioned and argued for lots and lots of different things to improve the conditions within the camps, which then drastically reduced the death rates. What you need to do is go and research her a little bit more to find out how exactly she improved those conditions and what did she actually do to make those conditions better. So when she returned, the Nightingale Fund was established for the training of nurses to recognise her for her work, and she used that money to set up the Nightingale Training School at St Thomas's Hospital in London. Thank you, Skydeep, for your assignment. Not Skydeep's in this lesson, but thank you. Now, St Thomas's Hospital, for those of you that don't know, is the hospital in London where Boris Johnson was treated for coronavirus. So just a little bit of useless information for you there. And then she wrote a book called Notes on Nursing, and that was published in 1859, and it was probably considered to be, the nursing curriculum was built around it, and it's still used now. It's obviously only about its 6th edition, but it is still used now, and people still kind of look back on what she did and how she contributed to improving the health. So obviously, you need to write a short summary about the milestones that we've discussed today. So you've got Jenner, Chadwick, Nightingale and Snow. So that's all of these done. So for those of you, like I said at the start, if you've already handed in the first 4, brilliant, start working on these. But you will need to do a little bit more research around these because I haven't given you all of the information that you need. And then for those of you that haven't handed me in this yet, then I am expecting these 4 plus Jenner, Chadwick, Snow and Nightingale in by the start of next Thursday's lesson, and then next Thursday I will set you a video on these 4, and then I will teach you the 20th century when we get back into school on the 16th of June. It will be for you. So yeah, so like I say, I will be online for the vast majority of your lesson. I am nipping out at about 12:20. I will have my phone with me, so if you need me, then please do email me, and I will be back in front of my laptop at about 1:45, depending on how long it takes to give him his injections. So I am very excited to see you all soon. Yeah, be safe, and email me if you need me. Thanks everybody.